Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
Death Rattle of the Toxic World, Part 2, Ogma and Promest. I was intensely thirsty, and my stomach growled in emptiness. It only served as a minuscule irritant, the kind of irritant like a grain of sand chafing and digging into an open wound. Such a tiny thing, but so unbearably uncomfortable. My feet burned. I had never walked this far before. The only thing that kept me going was the compulsive need for vengeance. But no, it was more than that. What I truly wanted was to renew the surface. We had to leave the false safety of the underground and reclaim our birthright. I found the door of my old home as the bright light returned, appearing over the edge of the world in a blaze of orange and yellow. The specks of light faded back to blue as if they had never existed in the first place. I hesitated for a moment to reconsider my previous assessment. If the toxin was gone, then why were the air and water blue? Maybe they always had been. I approached the door cautiously, wondering if guards were loitering inside. If there were, I would be forced to face them one way or another. I knew of no other entrance. Grim amusement drew the corners of my cracking lips into a somber grin. There was a lever to operate the door right there beside it. We could have come back any time we wanted to. My amusement morphed into downright giddiness, and I openly cackled as the doors slid open with the creak of aged metal. There was no one to impede my entry. Why would there be? What use is it to patrol a portal that leads to certain death? I walked in and was faced with the same issue as before. The renderer of our ill-fated group had already tried unsuccessfully to escape this room the way we had entered. To start, I figured that I must close the outer door. I cycled the lever that the acolyte had used to open it. The tapered design of the opening pushed any rogue dirt from the path of the steel wings. Once again, steam spewed from the ceiling ducts, and to my surprise, the inner door slid open. I slapped my forehead at the mechanism's simplicity. Somehow its workings had eluded us, despite its obvious engineering geared toward ease of use. In the empty hallway, I had time to clear my head and re-examine my predicament. The leaders would kill me, not for coming back with no relics, but for being out too long. I represented a threat to their authority. Whether or not they knew beforehand that the toxicity had subsided, I was proof that it had. Gods are supposed to know all. I would be disposed of before I could utter a syllable of my tale. If I ran across any acolytes, they would demand I go before the leaders. I needed a way to get to the normal folks. Even then, it would be difficult to convince anyone, indoctrinated as they were. The idea struck me with a force and suddenness similar to the electrical arc that had obliterated the runner in the EPF. The mouth breather. He was the only one I could turn to. I just had to figure out some way to get there. My time of pondering ran out before I had thought of anything. 3 acolytes, garbed in their red attire and long point-nosed masks, came running out of the darkness. Their haste revealed intent. Somehow the leaders knew that I was here. The lie formed on my tongue with swiftness and wit. It came easily, for it was not fully mine. The leaders had been using the same one for years. "Come," said one of the acolytes. "The leaders have awaited your return." I stood my ground. "Why do you hesitate while the divines sing your praises?" "I will not come with you," I replied. "What?" "I will not sully my presence with false deities." "Heresy!" hissed the acolyte. The other two moved to my sides, fully preventing any attempt at escape. "Do you not recognize me? I have walked the toxic world. I have breathed the air, and through breath, purified it. The toxicity is no more. I am the toxic lord, true god of the surface, sent to cast down the usurpers." I lifted my hands while keeping my upper arms tight to my sides. The acolytes at my sides pressed closer. "Really, Inspector? Then by all means come and cast down the usurpers," said the acolytes sarcastically. They were not falling for it. Fortunately, I had stalled long enough to concoct an alternative plan. The hooked proboscises of the two acolytes were within reach of my open palms. I had tasted fresh air, and I wasn't going to let a few of the leader's cronies stop me from breathing it again. I grabbed their masks by the noses and pulled, obscuring their vision. My foot leapt into the crotch of the acolyte in front of me. He doubled over and was greeted by a fist to the mouth. He collapsed to the floor. A few of his teeth buried themselves in the flesh of my knuckles. I spun to my left and dug my elbow into this one's temple. He crumpled unconscious. The last acolyte standing jumped on my back. His mask clattered across the concrete. He managed to catch my throat in the crook of his elbow. I felt pressure squeeze my neck. Spots appeared in my vision almost immediately. I threw myself backward against the wall. The combined weight of my body and his collided with the hard surface. His grip loosened with a huff as the air was forcibly expelled from his lungs. I took the opportunity to clasp my hands around the nape of his neck. Through some unknown reserve of strength, I managed to toss the acolyte over my shoulder. His head smacked the floor, and there was a sickening crackle of shattering displaced vertebrae. My footfalls echoed as I ran. I pulled the acolyte's teeth loose from my fist and unceremoniously tossed them away. I was sure that one of them was dead, but the others were most likely just knocked out. It would not be long before they woke. The one had been an accident. I couldn't bring myself to murder the others. I made it to the elevator and pressed the button. It shot down, bringing me back to the place that I had once called home. At the bottom, I pried the casing loose on the button and pulled a bundle of wires free. Hopefully, the acolytes would be trapped up there. I prayed that I had not caused irreparable damage, as this was the only way I knew to get to the surface. I had to get to the FOR. That mouth-breather was the only one who I could truly trust. He was not like the others. While his body was deformed, his mind was the sharpest that I had encountered down here. Beyond that, he was my friend, and friendship was a rare commodity in the underground. I couldn't even bring myself to trust my wife. I hoped that she would agree to live on the surface with me, to bear the next generation of humanity, but my gut told me otherwise. No, it was to the farms that I must go. I cursed myself for not procuring one of the acolyte's robes and mask as a disguise. As it was, I struggled to remain hidden. Fortunately, the hallways were pitch black, and I could stumble my way through with the distant orange glow of candles serving as a warning. There were a few close calls, but in each occurrence I managed to retreat back the way I'd come without being discovered. Once, I heard a few people remarking on the oddity of the sounds that I was creating in my clumsy fumbling. They did not investigate, however. Curiosity was a trait that had been stringently disciplined out of us. I entered food and oxygen replenishment and knew that I could stay hidden no longer. It was time to practice carrying my new mantle. I approached one of the farmers with a confident gait. He turned to me with shock in his eyes. "Inspector, I thought you had been lost to the toxicity." "Lost? Nay, found. Who holds the keys to the chains of the mouth-breathers?" His bewilderment turned to suspicion with a narrowing of his eyes. "What do you want with the mouth-breathers? They give life to the plants, you know." "Plants?" I chuckled derisively. "On the surface, the plants will have all the air they need." "Surface? What in toxicity are you planning, Inspector? I'll call the CRP to come take you if you set a toe near the mouth-breathers." "You will? You'll call the CRP on the man who purified the toxin?" "Purified the... What nonsense are you on about?" "Where do you think I've been?" The trowel dropped from his limp hands. "No, it's not possible. There is only death up there. Toxin above, communion below." "Death no longer. I have been there, above. I have rid the world of the toxicity. No longer must we cower below. I am the toxic lord." Something I said must have struck a religious chord in the man, for he fell with his knees in the dirt. "Now," I continued, "who has the key?" The farmer groveled before me. It felt wrong, but I needed to free my friend. The keeper has the key. He should be here soon to feed and water the mouth-breathers. That, or a renderer, but I doubt you want to face them." "First to believe, but not my first. You shall be my left hand. Continue in your labor, but know that the time will come when I will call you to my side, and I will depend upon you to spread my word." "Yes, Lord, I will do as you say," he replied. A thought struck me, and I made one last-minute request. "Gather seeds and seedlings, farmer. We will need them." I crouched below the squat plants and made my way to the mouth-breather, stealthily as I could muster. I stopped a few times along the way to drink from the sprinkler system and to eat fresh produce. It helped to quell the dehydration and starvation, but drew my exhaustion into sharp relief. I had not slept in a long time. Try as I might, I could not elude the senses of the mouth-breather. "Inspector, I have missed our discourse. What has preoccupied you such, and why do you conceal yourself amongst the flora?" I hissed at him. "Quiet. Many things have changed. I'm getting you out of here." As per usual, his disgusting appearance belied his intelligence. He shut his mouth and continued as if nothing were out of the norm. I felt fatigue falling over me like a comfortable blanket. My eyes were heavy, and I struggled to keep them open. My head nodded and lurched forward in a futile attempt at staying awake. I dozed in and out of consciousness. A sharp, loud wail drew me from my unwilling slumber. I saw that the keeper was here, and my friend had alerted me with his uncharacteristically exaggerated exclamation. In a panic, I burst from behind the greenery and tackled the keeper. His figure slid through the excrement. Before he could shout for help, I grabbed his jaw and dashed his skull on the pavement. I had meant to convince the keeper to give me his key willingly. Crude, barbaric, yet you have achieved your goal, said the mouth-breather. How long has it been since your last respite? That was it, I replied, referring to my unwilling slumber in the crops, and rifled through the keeper's pocket. I pulled a key free and hopped off his prone body. The key fitted the mouth-breather's shackles. His arms were free, and then his legs. He rubbed the sores on his wrists and then stood. He stretched, testing his limbs, and finding them to be satisfactory, he grabbed me in his arms and pulled me back into the relative safety of the greenery.
There is no normal reason for you to skulk about and ambush unsuspecting men. What epiphany has struck you during your sabbatical?
Asked the mouth-breather. I've been to the surface. There is no toxin. At least, not anymore. He scratched at the split that bifurcated his upper lip.
I had theorized that this may be the case. Power wielded and its wielders unwilling to give up power. So then, explain your goal. You have released me. What now?
Well, I suppose I should let the other mouth-breathers free.
Counterproductive. Don't misunderstand me. I have the utmost sympathy for my brethren. Given differing circumstances, they could have led fairly average lives. But they are not like me. They were not gifted with the same drive or mental discipline as me. If only they had been treated as children and not tools. If only they had been mentored instead of scorned, taught rather than left to rot. No, it is better that they remain here, chained up like animals. For through lack of nurturing, animals are all that they can be.
You make a good point. The mouth-breathers are too far gone to save. But what of the others? We need more people to live on the surface. I already have one. There is a farmer that has agreed to follow me.
Indeed. And how did you convince him to cast off his shackles of dogma?
I blushed, knowing that the mouth-breather would not approve of my lies. I told him that I was the toxic lord, purifier of the surface.
Cruder more than assaulting the keeper. But sometimes truth comes forth from a falsehood, especially when other anti-logics are clouding the brain. Eventually your followers will learn the truth, either by your own admission or their own discovery. Are you prepared to pay that price?
Yes. I don't think that anyone down here will follow me otherwise.
The temptation of power is overwhelming. Who's to say that you won't become like the leaders? Will you be drunk on power? Will you enforce your own will on those that follow you? How could you resist? Life on the surface will be yours to command.
I wouldn't. I only wish the best for our community. How can evil come from good intention?
That is what worries me. Best intentions tend to lead to the worst results. Putting community first often hurts those you sought to protect. Look at what happened here. Did any of these mouth breathers deserve to be used? No, but it was what was best for the community. Be wary. Time will tell, but I know that we stand a far better chance up there than we do down here. And when the time comes to give up the power that your self-appointed title holds, I hope you heed the words that I have spoken. Now, What else does your plan entail?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought that far ahead. The mouth breather sighed and rolled his cataracted eyes. But I could tell that he was pleased to have a chance to flex his mental muscles.
Well then, it is a good thing that you chose to free me first. Let us escape and find a safe place to rest. After, I will have formulated something of substance.
He began to move through the stalks like flowing water. He always knew where the farmers would be, and he led me through the fields to the exit without confrontation. It was much easier to navigate the halls with the mouth breather taking point. It was unnerving that this man was able to sense what was to come before there was any indication of a presence. We darted like shadows through the various junctions before he stopped.
Do you know this place?
He asked. No. Where are we?
How should I know? I have only ever known the wall to which I was chained. Enlighten me on the functions of this place, and then rest. It should be safe.
I told him all that I knew about the workspaces, the people that inhabited them, and the evening worship services. By the end of my spiel, even the cold and slightly damp concrete floor looked comfortable. Sleep fell over me easily. The keeper visited me during my dreaming. He was no longer covered in rubble, but the wounds remained. Somehow, he was standing on crushed and mangled legs. Blobs of dark red jelly filled the open holes in his body. He was wearing the same mask and suit that he had on the surface. Oddly, I found the mask to be far stranger than the damage that should have left him dead.
Inspector, put on your mask,
he shouted in panicked urgency. What do you mean, Keeper? We read the journal. We breathed the air. The toxin is gone.
Yes, gone up there. It's down here. The mask, Inspector.
What do you mean down here? There is no toxin here, and there is no toxin above. It is all just a lie.
Toxin below, communion above. We are one. None can live above. By faith we die. By belief we are deceased. By obedience we rot. Put on your mask.
No, there is no toxicity. You know more than anyone. The toxin is gone.
Really? Are you sure? He asked.
Yes, I yelled. He took his mask off and let it fall to the ground. He pulled the metal tab at the front of his suit and let it fall to his ankles. The perforated suit dragged at his wounds, reopening them. Black blood started to flow down his front, and the smell of rotten insides assailed my nostrils.
If the toxin is gone, he said, then why are you wearing your mask?
I grabbed at my face, and my hand was met with a wriggling mass of tubules. It felt like the same material as the mask, but it was living. Tentacles writhed over my nose and eyes. They burrowed into my throat. I choked on the being that was covering my entire head and woke.
Are you adequately rested?
Asked the mouth breather. I pulled myself from the cold floor, stretched, and shook the limpness from my extremities. More or less, I said, as I ran my fingers over my face, just to ensure that there was nothing there.
Good enough. I have a plan now, but there are some conditions. First, you are no longer to refer to me as mouth breather. We are beyond that now. From here on out, you are to call me Ogma. I suggest that you too find a name suitable for one claiming to be the Toxic Lord. We are entering new territory, and it is tantamount that men shed off the habitual reference of another by title. Second, the leaders are to die. There is no leniency for their crime, and I won't have them come to the surface with the rest of us. There is no telling what influence they could hold, and whether they would try to reclaim divinity. Third, none are to come with us unwillingly. There will be many who refuse. The temptation will be great to force them to live, but the reality is that they are free-willed. It must be that these are left behind to the doom that awaits them. Their desire is for safety, and that is something that we cannot guarantee. Do you agree to these terms?
Sure. Fine. What's your plan, Ogma?
We can remain hidden for now by sticking to the uninhabited sections. From the shadows, we will conduct our conversion. It will be hazardous. The leaders and their acolytes will be actively seeking to root us out and eradicate our message. It is our sanction to ensure that, even if we are discovered and killed, the seeds of doubt will have already been planted. Propaganda works best when truth, no matter how couched it is in lies, is at its core. You have already assumed the title of Toxic Lord. We will use this to our benefit. You are to preach to the masses as they work and then disappear into the darkness. Your sermons should be short but poignant enough to sway. Think on them as soon as possible. When enough support has been garnered, we will confront the leaders and depose them as divinity. Once they have been dealt with, we will be free to lead our followers to the surface, and hopefully find a new existence there. It's a long shot, but the alternative is death. Our first step will be to map routes of escape from the various departments of Leva. Second, we'll be reaching out on an individual basis. We must worm our way into the hearts and minds of the people. Third, we should find a way to broadcast a message of rebellion throughout the compound. After that, everything else will fall into place.
This is all good, but what happens when we reach the surface?
I don't know. We must learn to survive and grow. There is no manual for reviving humanity. I think that having an abundance of minds will be the key. Necessity breeds ingenuity, but I cannot predict how we will fare.
I understand. It is a new frontier, and we will face hardships that we have never endured before. I think that it will be better, though. Life down here is unnatural and doomed. Our only hope is to regain purchase above ground. We will learn to live on the surface. We must learn to live on the surface.
Indeed. Let's get started.
Ogma led, and I pointed out directions to him when we came across familiar halls. We went from the food and oxygen replenishment all the way to the corpse rendering plant without encountering another soul. Ogma was like a prescient ghost, always knowing where people would be. By the end of our excursion, I was completely baffled and lost, but Ogma knew each corridor. Finally, after a long day of running through darkness, we settled on going to my quarters for food. It was agreed that we dare not try to rest there, but my first sermon was prepared. My wife was to be the congregation. I left Ogma at the threshold and entered alone. My wife was there, but to my astonishment, she seemed unperturbed by my sudden appearance.
"Oh, you're back. Where have you been?"
"Is that all you have to say?" I asked as I made my way to the food dispenser.
"Yes. What else do you want?"
"I want you to be excited, happy, relieved, anything. I have been gone for an unusually long time. I am your husband. Where is your emotion, your vested interest in my well-being? What is wrong with you?" She took a seat at the table.
"Nothing is wrong with me. You were gone. My feelings have no bearing on the betterment of community, so why have them? You could have been dead for all I know. You could very well have been part of the meal on my table last night. Does it make a difference if I felt sorrow? I didn't. Would it change anything if I wailed in mental anguish and failed to perform my job? No, and actually it would have been a detriment. I do not serve you. I serve the leaders."
The food was delivered. I dropped the journal of the last man on the table and took both my meal and hers. I had made up my mind about her. She was lost, never to be found again. My wife would refuse to come to the surface, regardless of what I could say to her, or what would lie unread in that book. She wouldn't hear me or touch the journal. Both were toxic to her.
"Where are you taking my food? What is your problem?"
My problem? My problem is you. Goodbye, beloved. You will be troubled by me in the coming days, but it will be indirect. This conversation will be our last. I left her there, stunned and hungry. I walked through the doorway and resolved never to see her again. But I was not like her. I cared. Tears flowed from my eyes, unhindered by my attempts to stop them. Ogma's left eye grew moist in sympathy.
"It did not go well,"
he said. It was a question, but it flowed from under his split lip as a statement.
"No. This does not bode well for future endeavors. If you can't even convince your wife..."
"I can convince others. She was one of those that must be left behind. My love was misplaced. Her love ends with the leaders." He nodded with understanding. I hadn't even had the chance to speak my sermon. It would have made no difference. She was too far gone. We left to find a safe space to eat our meal and rest. I tossed and turned over the concrete floor. The loss that I felt hit me harder than I expected. When we got up, I knew that today was more important than any other in my life. Despite my tiredness, I had to strive for peak performance. Ogma was the first to speak after our slumber.
"Are you prepared? Have you practiced your sermon?"
"Yes, it is concise and convincing. Any who doubt will be compelled to follow."
"And have you chosen a name?"
"Yes."
"Good. Let's go."
My message started in the FOR, where we knew that I had one follower already. It was to be the true test of my persuasive talents. Apprehension was already tugging at my confidence. I did my best to mask its growing presence and entered the fields. As I walked, I beckoned to the men as they tended the crops. Some of them continued, but others followed me. Apparently, they still recognized me as an inspector. The leaders must not have sent out an alert of warning about me or my heresy. I speculated that either they were so sure of their brainwashing or that even the knowledge of my continued existence could prove fatal to their regime. Whatever the case, they had not expected me to pull a stunt like this. I found a central location in the food and oxygen replenishment and called out with a loud voice, "Come, gather here. Sit and take comfort. Relax now. You have earned as much." A few of the stragglers drew closer, and even more came out of a need to conform. By the time I began my speech, almost the entire work complement of the FOR were settled between the dirt and plants. "You all have known me for who I was before. I was your inspector, and often the exactor of cruel punishment on behalf of the leaders. All this has changed. Many of you may wonder where I have been these last few days. Doubt if you must, but feel the truth of my words. I have been to the surface. I have seen the desolation and breathed the toxicity. Through my breath, the toxin has been removed. I am Promest, the toxic lord. Soon we will reclaim our place above. The only toxin that exists now is the poison of our leaders. Yes, you have heard me right. The leaders have betrayed us. I was sent by them to the surface to die. Others were with me, and they did indeed succumb to the toxic air. I watched them wastefully die, sent to suicide by our leaders. I was meant to die too, but instead something incredible happened. I inhaled the toxic fumes and exhaled fresh air. Each breath pulled in more and more of the toxicity, and clean air came out from my throat. Eventually, there was no more toxicity left. I saw Ogma give me the sign to wrap things up. I stood up and noticed that a group of CRP were entering the FOR. "We belong up there. You cannot deny it. We have all seen our society slowly crumble. How long will it be before the water goes sour? How long can our plants last when the mouth breathers die? When will the power go out for good? We can't live here. We were meant to grow and expand, work for our own livelihood, and enjoy life. If you choose to stay, then fine. But if you choose to go, don't do it for my sake. Live on the surface for yours." The CRP were pushing through the rows of plants. I needed to leave. I sprang to my feet and yelled one final statement. "The surface is ours for the taking." I jumped over the row of seated farmers and ran as fast as my legs would carry me to Ogma's position. He was gone. I cursed and tried to remember the escape route. I half-guessed and ran down a dark corridor. One of the corpse removers bore down on me. He was nearly upon me when Ogma's tumorous arms swung out from behind a corner and knocked him to the floor. I hadn't even noticed Ogma hiding in the shadows. He kicked the CRP's head and motioned me forward. Ogma and I sprinted with the remaining CRP following, but the halls were dark, and the sound of our footsteps reverberated throughout. It was difficult to pinpoint where any noise was coming from. Soon, Ogma stopped.
"They shouldn't be able to find us here. We managed to evade them about 5 turns ago."
His breathing was calm in contrast to my labored huffing. "Good. I don't think I could have gone much further."
"You must prepare yourself for such an eventuality. This is sure to prove the norm. The corpses know of us now. It will prove difficult to preach at the corpse-rendering plant."
"Corpsers? Do you mean the corpse removers?"
"I name them corpses because they do not remove only cadavers. They create corpses of the living.
I shuddered at the knowledge that I too was complicit in this act of creating corpses. I had sent many to the plant who were yet alive. A fitting name, I said, and one that could be applied to myself as well.
That legacy is behind you. Now you are Promest, the Toxic Lord. Whether that name carries corpses upon its back is for you to decide.
So, you did hear my speech. What did you think?
It's not what I would have said, but maybe that will be for the better. Your chosen name is suiting, strong and memorable. Whether they believe or not, it shall be forever carved into their minds.
Well, that's hopeful at least. I just wish that there had been more time to reach those farmers on a personal level.
You did what you could with the time allowed. That is all that anyone can ask given the circumstances. We should move on to the next. The most likely target, given our position in the complex, should either be the emergency medical clinic or the energy production facility. Which do you prefer?
I thought of my former wife and felt disgust at visiting the clinic and hearing her words of apathy. Let's go to energy production.
Very well, but keep in mind that you are only forestalling the inevitable. It will be necessary to reach as many people as possible. We need others to spread the legend of Promest and Ogma on their crusade toward the surface.
I know. I just can't stand seeing her right now. We can come back to it. I'll be ready then.
That's fine. I understand. But you must steel yourself for when we do. The time is coming swifter than you imagine. And when it does, you will have to face that woman.
You understand? How can you? I spent half my life married to that woman. I wondered the entire time what she looked like under her clothes. I imagined what her skin felt like, how her lips would feel pressed against mine. I never even touched her. How can you claim to understand the pain that I felt at her words? How can you know the anguish that I felt at the realization that she would not come to the surface with me? Again the water leaked from his left eye.
I know more than you assume. I remember my mother. She was the most beautiful woman conceivable. I remember her holding me for the first time. I remember the look of disgust in her eyes as she surveyed the misshapen features of my face. I remember her mistreatment. I was beaten and neglected until I was old enough to be sent to food and oxygen replenishment. Can you envision the despair of a child rejected by his own mother? I'm sure you can, so don't lecture me on your feelings. Human imagination is far more credible a witness than we give it credit.
I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Don't apologize. It was my burden to bear, and its weight made me as strong as your weight will, if you choose to shoulder it. But we have stalled here for far too long. It is time to move on.
All right, I said. Lead the way. There was no one in the halls on our path to the EPF. Despite this, I felt the eerie sensation of being followed. Ogma must have felt it too, for he quickened his pace and made sharp turns through passages that were indirect. It took us longer to get to our destination, but I felt confident that we at least had some time before we would be discovered. Ogma took position at the base of the stairwell to guard against intrusion, and I made my way up it. The air tingled with static. Some of the runners stopped in their tracks and gaped in awe at my arrival. I found a position perched on a platform near the top of the stairs. I had to yell over the noise and distance to reach all of their ears. "Runners! You may have known me as the Inspector, but I come to you now as Promest. I am sure that you have noticed my absence. Many of you may not have cared. I could see the shock in your eyes. The idea that we are one is ingrained in all of us. Surely you assumed that I died serving the community, or from lack of faith. The former is false, but the latter is somewhat more accurate. The leaders sent me to die." Many of the runners were now standing on the ramshackle stairway and looking up at me. "They gave me a fool's errand to the surface. Yes, the toxic surface. As you can well see, I am yet still living. The others with me succumbed, but I survived. I have breathed the toxic air. In my lungs, the toxin was removed. The air has been cleared. I am the toxic lord, the one who has walked above and lived. The only reason we are still here underground is the leaders' refusal to give up power. We have worshipped false deities, and they shall fall beneath us. The surface is—" I paused when I saw Ogma's foot dart out and a man tripped over it. The CRP were here. "The surface is ours for the taking," I finished. Ogma punched the corpse remover's neck and scampered up the stairs. I ran down to meet him as 9 more men came pouring through the entrance. 3 of them were acolytes, and panic caused my heart to pound against the confines of my ribcage. Ogma and I came together just below the crest of a turbine. The CRP were moving toward us at a leisurely, defensive pace. They knew we were dangerous, but also that we were trapped.
"I surmise that this may be our last stand. We have the tactical advantage, but even you and I may not prove a match for their numbers,"
said Ogma. "Well, if this is to be our last stand, then let's make it a good one," I replied as I pulled a length of makeshift railing free from the perimeter of the stairs.
"Perhaps enough have heard our message by now. We may die, but the cause shall live."
"I have heard," said one of the runners as he came out of the turbine. He held out one of his blistered palms. "Give me the pipe. You two head up the stairs. I will deal with the CRP and the acolytes," he said. Ogma nodded in approval, but I was hesitant. "What are you planning? How can 1 man stand against the strength of 9? I asked. "Please, Promest, time is running short. Allow me to serve the toxic lord in this way. I will defeat them and allow for the great emergence." "Great emergence? How are you to defeat them? We can fight together." "No, we can't. Go now. There is no time." The acolytes were nearly upon us. They and their cadre sauntered confidently up the steps.
"Heretic! How does it feel knowing that you will be rendered soon? I will personally ensure that your toxic corpse is macerated and fed to the mouth-breathers and the subterratards," yelled one of the acolytes. "Give him the pipe, Promest. He has chosen this path. When he is done, the rest will be a tough fight, but one that we may yet win," said Ogma.
"I can't send this man to his death, Ogma," I replied. "I am ready to die for you, toxic lord. Please, let me do this," said the runner. He slowly wrapped his hand around the pipe in mine. I let go. Ogma pulled my half-unwilling body up the steps. The runner jumped back into the turbine and started banging on the sides of it. "What is he doing?" I yelled. As the acolytes and CRP passed the runner's cylinder, he jumped out and brandished the pipe at them. The metal tube flashed and slammed down on the head of the lead acolyte. Blood spattered from his head and spilled under his mask. He tumbled down the stairs. The corpse removers struggled to hurdle over his body. The runner kept swinging and 2 more fell from the blunt force. One of the CRP, the burliest of the bunch, tossed aside the figures of his comrades and approached the runner. The pipe's trajectory arched down toward this one's head, but he caught it in a massive fist. The weapon was pulled from the grip of the runner. I winced as the corpse remover planted his other fist in the gut of the runner. I thought that he was done for, but the runner had other ideas. He used his height advantage to tackle the CRP, and the others below fought against their combined weight to remain upright. This was when a huge crackle rang through the air. My eyes struggled against the brightness of the blue zigzag that shot through the group. I realized what the runner had done. He had compromised the structure of his turbine, and the discharge of electrical energy had fried him and the entire force. The runner, the acolytes, and the corpse removers all charred and melted together into a mass of dead or dying. Those on the brink of death moaned in agony. I cried out in an agony to match their own.
"Come, now is our chance for escape,"
said Ogma. I followed in a stupor. I had seen my share of death, but nothing matched what I had just witnessed here. We stepped over the smoking corpses, blackened by heat and withered by the electricity. It was surreal. Everything seemed to be washed out, blurry and incomprehensible. Before I knew it, we were gone onto the untraveled roads of the underground. Reality came screaming back to me when we were safe. "What in toxicity was that?" I asked, reverting back to my old vocabulary.
"That was the cost of your title,"
responded Ogma. How must I? What can I do to stop it?"
"You can't. This is what you chose. If it is to be effective, you must retain this way. Do you now understand the power you have? Do you comprehend why it mustn't remain so on the surface? Promest, you have chosen the easy way. It is the most efficient, but also the deadliest. More will die in your name. That is why, for better or for worse, you must swear off this persona of the Toxic Lord."
"Yes, I'll get rid of it immediately. How can I preach these words that inspire men to throw away their lives?"
"You must. The lie has already been cast. The rumors are sure to abound. If you recant, the people will either return to the leaders, or worse, murder you on the spot."
"I have to continue the farce?"
"Yes, if you have any ambition of living to see the surface again."
I slid to the floor, aghast at the implications of such a burden. "And what about when we reach the surface?" Ogma gave me a reluctant, pained gaze.
"Well, let's hope that the people are too focused on their own survival to bother with something as trivial as falsity enacted to get them there. We don't have time to dwell on these hypotheticals. Let's get to our next destination."
I nodded, and we moved on toward the CWP. My reservations and misgivings about our task melted away as clarity returned to my mind. I felt nearly invincible as we entered the wide chamber of faucets. The CRP and the clergy had sent their best to deal with us and had been left with a pile of crispy corpses for their effort. The leaders knew of us by now, but they would have to adjust their tactics to take us down. Numerical advantage hadn't worked. It would probably take time for them to come up with a new plan. I walked to the middle of the center of water purity. Ogma took a more active role this time, gathering the checkers to form a circle around me. To those who remained, I called out, "Come, your services are no longer needed." The checkers were more than eager to end their water torture. It was obvious that they were sick of constant drinking. They gathered around me, and none within earshot remained at their post. "I know that many of you have suffered at my hands. I have sent you to a death undeserved. It was deemed necessary by the leaders. I followed their decrees without question. It was your job to die. I believed it to be your duty, but my eyes have been opened. The leaders sent me on a quest, a journey to the surface. I faced the toxicity, much like you do every day. While those around me fell to the surface, I remained. I breathed the toxic air, and the air was toxic no more. I took on the name Promest and became the Toxic Lord. The surface is pure. We can return above ground in the great emergence. We will reclaim the surface and cast down the false leaders that have kept us here and killed us for no reason. Are you with me?" I shouted the last words and was greeted by the cheers of the checkers. At this moment, a large group of acolytes, 30 strong, charged into the CWP. Ogma and I had underestimated the leaders' swiftness, and apparently the leaders and I had underestimated the power of my words. The instant that the acolytes converged on our group, they were swarmed by the checkers. I started to move away as the brawl ensued. The checkers etched their fury and misery onto the bodies of the acolytes. The end result was a pile of broken flesh, blood, and shattered, long-nosed masks. Ogma and I did not linger long to gape at the brutality. We slipped out while the checkers were still stomping on the pulped acolytes. When we were an adequate distance away from the carnage, Ogma started to speak.
"That was a promising outcome, but a dire one. This accelerates things. There will be no way to hide that massacre, and when it is discovered, those checkers will be put to death. We must act tonight. At the chapel, we will incite a riot against the leaders and the zealous acolytes. My estimation says that there is only time to visit one more area. There is only one single, logical option."
"No, I'm not ready yet."
"You have to be. It would be moot to go to the Divine Retrieval Depot. You would be met by only a few ears, while the rest are deaf."
"You're right about that. I can't imagine a subterritard comprehending anything other than beating on concrete and devouring food. But can't we go to the CRP?" He shook his head.
"Too dangerous. The corpses are there, and I have my doubts that they will see reason. More likely they would toss you into the oven. No, there is only one option, and not adequate time to argue."
I hung my head in defeat. He was right. It would be a waste to go to either. We had to go to the emergency medical clinic. I had to face my wife. We walked into the EMC. My insides twisted and my face contorted to match. I forced myself to take on a stoic expression. Ogma stood at the entry and turned to take watch. Errant thoughts tried to convince me that this whole ordeal was a mistake. There is no way we can live on the surface. Not enough people are being reached by your message. You will die here, underground. How are you going to kill the leaders? How can you kill gods? The words echoed through my mind, looping in an infinite cascade of doubt. My steps began to falter. Then a feeling rose in their midst like an enraged beast. It was primal and sobering, savage yet peaceful, wild but more human than anything. It had always been there, suppressed by conformity, coercion, and threat of death. This thing inside of me dashed away all my fears. Confidence replaced the anxiety, for I knew that this same will existed in the hearts of everyone living here below. Breath expanded my chest and I yelled. It was a message with no words, but it was far more potent than any sermon I had preached. The medics that had been darting about room to room stopped and stared at me. Faces poked out and peered around corners. The hallway, that before had been abuzz with activity, now sat motionless before me. I am Promest. I am the Toxic Lord. You have already heard the whisperings. I survived above where the leaders and the acolytes say that nothing can live. There is no toxin. It's gone. We belong on the surface. We belong out from under the crushing leaden thumb of the leaders. The time of the great emergence is nigh, and only a fool would miss its happening. If by now you are not convinced, then stay. Stay here and continue to rot. I started to move back to Ogma when a hand grabbed at my shoulder and spun me around. I found myself staring into the face of my former wife. Somehow, she did not seem quite as appealing as she had before. Her beady eyes were framed with softly wrinkled skin. Her nose was just a bit too small for her round head, and her cheeks sagged a little past her chin.
"Beloved, we need to talk,"
she said. "I have nothing to say to you that hasn't already been said."
"Then come with me and listen, or does our marriage mean nothing to you?"
Despite my disappointment at our previous encounter, I still loved her in whatever warped form that emotion had taken on. I followed as she led me into an empty room. The cot shimmered with ointment and bodily fluids. She stood beside it and looked down as she spoke.
"Husband, or should I call you Promest? What kind of title is that anyway?"
"It is not a title, it's a name. Before, I was inspector, but how can anyone tell me apart from the other inspectors but by appearance? This is better. On the surface, we will all have names," I replied.
"Seems rather wicked to me. Why would you want to differentiate yourself? We are one. Just look here."
She motioned with the swing of her arm to the bed.
"There was a man here. He was sick. All that remains of him is this smattering of blood and urine, and his corpse has been repurposed. He is not wasted. His death will keep us alive. What you are proposing will mean that we all die. Does it even matter that there is no toxicity on the surface? We can't live there,"
she said. "We have to. We don't belong here. Even if it were sustainable, this place is a prison. I can't stand it here. I have seen the surface. I have tasted freedom, and I won't give it up. I refuse to be sacrificed to the community."
"When infection is found, it must be cut out for the greater good,"
she said. I felt something brush against me. "What?" I asked as warmth spread down my right side. I staggered a bit and ran my hand to the heat. Pain erupted from the spot when my fingers closed around a short bone shaft that was planted on the side of my back. I instinctively pulled and was met with an even greater excruciating pain. I looked down at the palm of my hand. There, in my grasp, was an ornate shiv, decorated with the holy symbols of the leaders. "Ogma," I muttered. Hands slammed into my shoulders. I stumbled and fell onto the cot. I tried to push myself off it, but the ointment was too slick. My legs were hoisted up, and before I knew it, I was hurtling face first down the corpse chute. "Ogma!" I screamed. The thought of being boiled alive spurred me to action. The chute was smooth but narrow. I dug my elbows into the metal and pressed my knees down. My back was thrust into the top. The tattered remains of my clothing were ground to nothing from the pressure. I slid further down and then came to a stop. I could feel the heat rising through the rectangular tube. I could feel blood dripping from my back and running past my arms. I remembered the other nurse that I had sent to this same fate and wondered if she too had struggled to cling to life. My head started swimming. I wouldn't be able to stay conscious while losing this much blood. "The nurse! Close the wound." I steadied myself, pushing my back and knees harder onto the slightly flexing metal. When I was confident I was stable, I slid my right arm up to the wound and pressed my fingers into it. The pain caused me to jolt. The back of my head rapped against the roof of the chute, and I slid down a few more inches. Even though the distance was short, I could feel more heat licking at my face from below. I probed the wound with the tip of my index finger and winced. It was small, but deep. I managed to snag a portion of my shirt with my teeth. It was tough, but the compromised leather gave. I grabbed the strip with my free hand and braced myself. I shoved the material into my wound. It hurt, but when I was done, the steady flow of blood slowed to a minor trickle. Now what? My fight to survive had consumed my conscious existence, and now that I was free from the immediate pressure of imminent death, I had no idea what to do next. How could I get out of here? If I had gone down feet first, it may have been feasible to slowly work my way back up. But as it was, I didn't have the strength or know-how to go up. I was alive for the moment, but the macerator waited to dissolve me into goo. Sooner or later, I would end up there. So why avoid it? The answer eluded me, but made no difference. Stubbornly, I clung to life. After a long while of tensing up against the steel, my body began to ache. I was sweating in torrents, and the moisture made it all the more difficult to maintain my precarious hold. And then the heat started to shrink. It pulled away from my body and retreated further down the sloped hole. I held my position and waited. Surely this was some kind of trick, either of the leaders or of my own mind. But the longer I waited, the colder it got, and the more exhausted I became. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to cautiously make my way down the chute. I slowly released the pressure I was exerting and slid down. The heat in front of me rose, but gradually. It was not blistering, and so I kept going. Without warning, the floor gave out under me, and I was sent careening into a warm stew of floating chunks and viscous fluid. I didn't have to see to know that these chunks were bodies in various states of rendering. I felt them around me. Some were full corpses, floating on the surface. Others were bloated, waterlogged, and falling to pieces. Between them all were globules of meat, disintegrating limbs, and brittle bones. The smell was a horrible mix between savory and stomach-churning. I swam through the partially cooked gore, trying to find an escape. A slight current ran through the slurry. The current led my fingers to a filtering grate. I had to kick my way through. The flood of liquid sucked me through along with the rest of the contents of the macerator. I was in the CRP.
Ah, Promest. I was wondering when you would emerge,
said the voice of Ogma. I surveyed the room in an attempt to find him, and what I saw was horrifying. There was a trail of bodies, blood, and guts, starting from the entry and running all the way to Ogma. He was slumped against the wall, his arm still clinging to a circular red valve. He was nearly nude. The clothing that he still wore was torn, frayed, and saturated with blood. Black and purple bruising mottled his already discolored, lumpy skin. His right leg was bent backwards, and between his shoulder and neck was a cleaver. It had carved a wide gash through his collarbone and nearly to his chest. "Ogma! What happened?"
What had to? I heard you. Heard your descent into the corpse tube. I battled my way here and turned off the burners. Couldn't let you be cooked, now could I?
He asked as he wheezed in breath. "But why? Why would you do that?"
For the cause? No. It would be far nobler if such were true. But nobility can do little for a dying man.
"You can't die. I won't let you sacrifice yourself to me. We'll get help. Maybe one of the medics can—" Ogma interrupted me.
It's no use and no sacrifice. I can already sense that my life is leaving. You will have to lead them to the surface. Alone.
"No sacrifice? How can you say that? Ogma, you are a far greater man than I will ever be."
It is not a sacrifice, because I willed it. Promest, my brother, I love you.
I could feel the tears flowing down my cheeks. I sobbed through my words. "Ogma, how can I do this? What am I supposed to do without you?" Ogma did not cry or falter. He spoke steady, without emotion.
Honor my conditions and live.
I could hear a commotion outside of the room, but I ignored it. Ogma continued. He was beginning to become delirious.
Wall. Chained to the wall. Stuck in the wall. Can we get out? Can we live beyond the wall? Not me. I'll be stuck here. To the wall. Lived clamped to a wall, and I'll die propped on a wall. I'm sick of walls.
He regained his lucidity for a moment.
Promest, what is the surface like?
It is savage, brutal, and empty, but also the most beautiful thing in existence. There is blue water that sways and moves like a living being. Lighter blue hangs overhead with puffs of white that swim through it. Everything is illuminated by a yellow light that hangs above in the blue. The ground is dusty and barren, but below hide the mysteries of our ancestors. Structures are thinly veiled by the dirt. The air is like sugar.
That sounds wonderful.
I could hear combat from the adjoining chamber. Men yelled, and there was the clattering of furniture being thrown and improvised weapons colliding with flesh. A group of corpses backed through the entry. It drew my attention away from Ogma. Another group assailed them with farming implements, iron rods, and pickaxes. The corpses were no match for the armed group, and they fell beneath their assault. I recognized one of the men as the farmer that I had talked to first.
Toxic Lord, he shouted. I knew you weren't dead. You should hear the rumors. Our whole society has split asunder. There are skirmishes breaking out throughout. We figured that if we take the corpse-rendering plant, they...
Shut up, I said.
What?
Shut it. I'm busy. I turned back to Ogma. His head hung limply. I tried to shake him, but he did not respond. Ogma was dead. I cried out in anguish. You, farmer, I said. Choose a name for yourself and instruct others to do so as well. Then get as many of my followers as you can.
Yes, Lord. Where shall we meet?
We're going to the chapel. I grabbed Ogma and pulled him over my shoulders. My friend would see the surface if I had to drag him there myself. I placed his body into the arms of a few of my followers at the entrance to the chapel. Service was in session, and I could hear the muffled voice of the preacher. The farmer, who had chosen the name of Yim, inquired about my plan.
Promest, what are we doing here? Wouldn't our goals be better suited if we attack the leaders?
It is not time. This was Ogma's decision. We must reach the last and give them a final chance before moving on. Follow me. I strode into the chapel like I owned it. The preacher was lecturing on the new heresy that had formed and how toxic it was. I walked up to him without resistance and punched the mask off of his face. He collapsed into a heap, as weak as the message he spoke. I took his place and addressed the meager crowd. Come now and see the leaders that you so revere. You will learn that they are not gods. I left in a similar fashion to the one I had walked in with. I guided the group to the elevator that led up to the leaders. It felt like so long ago, but I still remembered the code for the keypad. I typed in 4950, and the door to the lift slid open. Many of my followers had expressions of astonishment at my knowledge of the code and the sheer size of the elevator. I turned to them. Men and women, this is a violent task we must undertake here, and only the weakest of faith should follow. If you have any doubt, come. You will see the leaders for what they are, and will know the truth. I am sure that many of you were eager to exact vengeance upon them, but you must stay here. Your faith is strong enough already. I let Yim serve as a gatekeeper of sorts. He knew better who to let through and who to keep back. Soon, the elevator was almost completely full. I pressed the button. The doors started to slide shut, and I shouted past them. Yim! Keep Ogma's body safe. I'm trusting you. He nodded through the closing gap. It shut and the lift moved up. The doors reopened to something that I had not expected. The whole room was full of bright light from a massive orb that made up the entire ceiling. The surface, the water, the expanse above, and the great light were displayed over this orb. It was amazing. Below the orb were the leaders, and they were far less than amazing. It was absolutely disgusting to behold. The leaders were splayed out on reinforced couches. They were naked and fat beyond belief. They were rounded bags of sagging flesh with 4 rotund mounds that scarcely escaped from the girth of their torsos. Tables of food and drink encircled their reclined thrones. We had caught them unaware, and thus their behavior was on full display. Slaves, whose eyes had been plucked out, wandered about, bringing the extravagant dishes and intoxicating beverages to their masters, while others serviced their other desires and needs. Pans of urine and feces were replaced and disposed of. Slaves of both genders performed sexual acts on the bloated figures. Most of them were limbless and strapped down to the leaders in a torturously endless repetition of whatever motion they had been trained to do. Their bodies could have fed and clothed 1,000. The rendered tallow from their bellies could have supplied us with candles for the foreseeable future. Instead, these useless piles of hedonism decided to play God. I didn't even have to give the order. My followers fell upon them and hacked away at the layers of fat with shovels, hoes, pickaxes, knives, pipes, and wires. The leaders screamed in pain. Chunks of white gristle splattered to the ground. The floor became slick with blood. It took far too long to end them through the layers of blubber. The slaves met a similar fate, albeit at a far faster rate. I felt a sadness for their demise, but knew that it was necessary. They were liabilities, like the mouth-breathers and the subterratards. As I surveyed the corpses of the leaders, splayed out like grotesque blooming flowers, I found myself wishing that Ogma were here to see the deaths of the men that had forced him into the miserable life he knew. This was one of his conditions. 2 of them had been fulfilled now. It felt like a good way to grieve. Mourning is always easier when someone bleeds. We took the elevator back down. Those who had seen had killed the leaders, recounted the tale to those waiting. They told of the debauchery of our leaders and of our grand victory. We had killed gods, and the legends would be a part of our society as long as we lived. I would be known as the killer of deities. We had seen our gods down here, and they were fat and lazy. We had been starving. It was injustice that these massive monstrosities had even managed to get to the size that they were. The dark reality of the situation is that they had been literally getting fat off of our corpses. We shuffled through the hallway when I stopped. The rest of the group stopped in match of my steps. Yim, do we have everyone?
We have everyone who chose to follow. What more do you require?
Go and check that no one willing is left. Let them know what we did. Second, I need an engineer to repair the lift panel. Third, make sure that you and the rest of the farmers have gathered your seeds. Finally, send someone to release the mouth-breathers.
They are not to come with us.
But I would be remiss to leave them there to die without at least tasting freedom.
Yes, Promest, at once.
Yim started to shout orders to the crowd. I allowed him to relay the orders before stopping him. Oh, and Yim?
Yes, Lord.
Find my wife and kill her. Yim nodded and left. He was useful but stupid, blindly obedient to my whim. Yes, he was no Ogma, but perhaps he would serve me even better. I led the remaining group to the other elevator. We were going to the surface. The engineer came to me as I waited just inside the sliding doors of the defunct lift carriage. I had been fiddling impatiently at the disconnected wires in an attempt to hasten our journey upward. I managed only to give myself a few minor shocks.
Hello? Promest?
Said the engineer. That is my name. I am the Toxic Lord. Who are you?
I'm the, engineer that you, asked for?
No, that's not what I asked. Who are you? What is your name?
My, name? I don't know. What do you, think my name should be?
Me? I don't choose for you. Your name is special. It is for you to choose.
Don't you, need me to do something or fix something?
Fine, but you'll need a name before long. For now, repair this panel. The engineer got to work splicing wires together. I watched his work with curiosity until something fell on my shoulder. I tried to brush it away, but it clung to my fingers. I looked at my hand and saw a kind of sickening red jelly. I turned my head to the ceiling and saw that it was oozing through the roof tiles. I wiped the gunk off my hand. Hey, engineer, give me a boost. The engineer turned away from the panel but still held a bundle of wiring in his hands.
Is this really necessary? What is that?
That is a dead man, and I'd prefer it if we didn't have to deal with him leaking over everyone that entered this elevator.
Dead man? What?
Just give me a boost. I've got to get him down. The engineer looked perturbed, but he complied with my wishes. I stepped into his palms and hoisted myself up. The ceiling panel was heavy with the body of the acolyte. He had chosen to jump down the shaft rather than die of thirst. The height had been too much, however. I shoved the panel aside, and the body slipped through. The engineer dropped my foot and stumbled backward. I fell hard onto the robed body of the acolyte. "What is wrong with you?" I said from my collapsed position.
I didn't expect that to happen.
"Just finish your work and get out," I shouted. The engineer finally finished splicing the wires back together. By this time, Yeem had returned. "Yeem," I said, "dispose of that engineer." "Yes, Toxic Lord, at once." "Discreetly." "Of course." I nodded in approval and gathered the first group into the elevator. The button worked now, and we were swiftly carried to the entryway. One body was dead just outside of the doors. It seemed as though he had succumbed to his wounds. The third was right where I had left him, neck snapped. I overeagerly strode past the acolyte corpse to the airlock. When everyone that could fit was in, I pulled the lever. The bright light poured through the gap in the doors. Gasps came from all around me. Whether they were in astonishment or a reaction to the harshness of the light, I could not tell. I gave the group a moment to marvel at the wonders of the surface before beginning to shout orders. "Everyone, listen. We are entering a new world. This is our great emergence, but it will not be easy. The hardships we are to endure will likely kill most of us, but it is a sacrifice that we must make if we are to continue as a species in this promised land. Your job now is to find us shelter. There are buildings here, left by our ancestors and buried in the dust. We will need to discover them if we are to survive. Spread out and search for one nearby. Be wary, however. Step lightly near them or you will fall to your demise. We will also need a source of water. Be sure that it is drinkable. We will meet here when the great light sinks below the surface. For now, we will still have to rely on our previous home until we gain a foothold here, so don't exert yourselves. Last, watch for storms. The wind is treacherous, and it will skin you alive if you let it. Take heart, though, for we will tame the surface, and our people will be fruitful here." Cheering erupted from the group. It was as if they had not heard a word I said, or rather, that they did not understand the task that we were faced with. They started to chant, "Hail, Promest! Hail the Toxic Lord!" I stayed by the doors as the group scattered to find locations of interest. With each new group that exited, I relayed the same speech. Soon, all of my people had left the safety of the underground. I found Ym, burdened with the body of Ogma and a sack full of seeds, bulbs, and saplings. Ym, stay with me. Your cargo is too precious to risk being lost to the elements. Yes, Promest, he replied. We waited there until the light faded over the horizon and the people meandered back to us. By the time the great light was gone, replaced by the lesser light and the little sparkling dots, only 3/4 of the people had returned. Their findings were promising. They told of a large river not far from here, with old ruins beside it. I made it a point to carry Ogma's body. We followed their direction and found it, just as they had said. This was to be our city. Many in the group had already dubbed it Promestus. We set up a crude camp within the safety of the ancient constructs and settled in for a rough night's rest on the cold and dusty floors. I slept better than anyone, finding that I had grown used to sleeping on uncomfortable surfaces. When the great light came again, I called Ym to follow with the plants, and I took Ogma to a clearing that I had seen on our way here. I laid the body down and started to dig a hole in the dirt with my bare hands. The white in the above condensed and covered the great light. The sky turned gray and ominous, as if the world was grieving with me. I thought about Ogma's words as I dug. Did I really need to deny my title of Toxic Lord? Wouldn't it be better if I were revered as a god? We needed unity now, and direction. I could provide that binding solution. I could lead us to life. How could I cast away such a boon? I finished digging, and the expanse above cried with me. I placed Ogma in the hole and called for Ym to bring the seeds. I pried open Ogma's jaw and planted a sapling in his gaping mouth. I wasn't sure if he would have liked that. In life, he had given his being to the continuation of plants, and in death, his body would do the same. I piled the dusty earth over him and planted more seeds over him. Ym, sow the rest of the plants on this field. We will remember Ogma and his sacrifice to our cause by their vitality, both in growth and to our existence, I said with a volume that was needless for the audience of one. Absolutely, Toxic Lord. These plants will grow on the land that you have made fertile, and they will sustain us by our belief. I winced at his statement's similarity to the religious proclamations given by the preacher at the services for our leaders. Beyond my disgust, though, I hoped that the plants would grow and thrive. Otherwise, we would have been better off remaining underground.